weekly, so please call me or Sister Norwood, usually, or Brother Hank, before you go out there if you're not sure. But everybody's welcome to come and minister. Everybody say minister. To minister, it's a good thing to have a ministry in your life where you're pouring out. If you want God to pour in, you better have a place for God to let it pour out. Amen? Church can kill you if you don't have a place to let ministry flow out. The Dead Sea has water coming in, but it doesn't have any water going out. That's why nothing's alive in the Dead Sea. Amen? So do remember nursing home, not this coming Tuesday, but Tuesday week. We'll be doing it again. Also remember, Covenant Recovery Ministry is on Tuesday evenings at 6:30 at 6 p.m. You can call Brother Abington any Tuesday to make sure. They do it every Tuesday, but you can call him any Tuesday. Before you go, I would advise you call and make sure that there's not something happening. Sometimes they cancel us due to something going on there, but you're welcome to, this is only for men. Let me make that sure. Only men. Women don't need to go to Covenant Recovery. It's just a bunch of men, so only men. Also, we have an opportunity, Happy Days, or what's it called? Happy Valley. I was thinking about Fonzarelli, I guess. I wasn't supposed to say that because Thursday, Friday, Happy Days. But Happy Valley is another nursing home type of place. I'm not sure. They have asked if we can come minister. And so if someone wants to pick that up as a ministry and be committed, everybody say committed. That's what ministry is. It's a commitment. And you want to be committed to that, let me know, and we'll try to work on getting that going. Amen? Amen. Divine Design. Y'all ready? This has been good. It's going to get better, I promise. A whole lot better. Divine Design. James 2. We'll go to Psalms 19, verse 1 first, and we'll start there. Psalms chapter 19 and verse 1. The Bible says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Now, glory means demonstration. Glory really means evidence. The heavens are the evidence there's a God. The heavens declare the glory are the evidence of God. Y'all ever seen a puppet show? Anybody ever seen a puppet show? Would you lift your hand? They get behind a curtain and they do little puppets. How many of y'all ever seen a puppet show and believe there was no puppeteer? You guys did? Y'all saw, I guess when you was kids, huh? How many of you, when you got to where you was kind of adult, understood things, you saw a puppet show and you thought there was no puppeteer? See, we understand as we get older, if there's puppets, something's controlling it. Are you getting the picture? The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech. In other words, it's always talking. And night unto night showeth knowledge. Verse 3, there is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. The heavens are an evangelist all the time. Next slide for me. They trying to help me out. They taking Sister Diane's place. We're gonna give them a little leeway. Here comes the professor. Slide number 2. All right. Do we see slide 2? All right. Any luck at all? And pull it down and start it over. I'll keep going. A guy named James Tour said this: only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say science takes away from faith. If you really study science, and we're going to study it tonight, you're going to be amazed before you walk out of here. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. James Tour, a nanoscientist, said that. The astronomical evidence for God. Let me put it like this. There is overwhelming. Somebody said, well, there's just no proof of God. I would dare say there is overwhelming proof of God. You're going to see it tonight. Unbelievable proof of God. The astronomical evidence for God must be strong when atheistic physicists admit that the universe exploded out of nothingness. Remember last week we talked about the cosmologic argument, and that is that we know science now understands that this thing had a beginning. The law of causality is anything that has a beginning must have someone to begin it or a cause to start it to happen. And now, for years and years and years, science evolutionists believed that the earth and the universe per se was eternal. And to be eternal meant it didn't have a beginning and it didn't have an end. And if something is eternal, you don't have to have a cause. It just always is. And they believed that for years. Now, isn't that amazing? They have no problem believing in an eternal universe. But if you tell them there's an eternal God, they have trouble with it. But when Einstein come along, we talked about it last week, Einstein discovers the relativity, the law of relativity, and we find out that everything that we know in the universe has a beginning. You can go back to last week and watch that video if you missed it, and how now they say it all began with the Big Bang. And we don't like the word Big Bang, but remember, when they say Big Bang, they're simply admitting there was a beginning. That conforms to the first verse in our Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So I'm glad they finally got to the first verse. Hey, if I can get you to the first verse, there's a chance I might can get you the rest of them. In the beginning, God created. Now they're not going to say God did it, but they know there was a beginning to time and space and matter. And now they admit this, but the scientific evidence for God does not end with what's called the cosmologic. Go to the next slide for me. Any luck? May have to stay with them. She's going to help you. Slides can't help sometimes, so I'm going to give it a couple minutes here. All right, the cosmological argument, we talked about that last week. That was last week, and you can go back and this is all on Facebook on our church page. The cosmological argument is the universe had a beginning. For years, scientists said, Aristotle said there was no beginning. It always existed. They know that's not true now. All right? But if you tell them there's an eternal God, they'll say, nah, that ain't possible. But for years, they believed there was an eternal universe and had no problem with it. All right? There's the cosmological argument. That is, the universe had a beginning. That's very important. And then this week, we're going to talk about what's the teleological argument. And that is the precision of the universe. There is amazing astronomical precision in our universe today. You're going to see this tonight. Now, telos is the Greek word for design. And the teleological argument just tells us that telos, being the Greek word for design, means the design argument, that this thing is not just randomly happening. Next slide for me. Have I set them up wrong? There you go. I gave the pretty little transition to him. I thought it'd be neat. Design, number one, every design has a designer. Have you folks ever seen a house and just believed, man, that thing just popped into existence? You ever seen a watch and thought, well, there must not be a watchmaker? Everything designed has a designer. That's just common sense. The universe not only has design, but has highly complex design. Therefore, the universe had a design. That is the general teleological argument of design. Go to the next slide for me. Guy named Isaac Newton. You ever heard of Isaac Newton? He lived 1642 to 1727. He just went away. Let's try to bring him back. We're going to try to resurrect Isaac Newton right quick. Hallelujah. Working too good now. The pendulum just swung. Whoop. There it goes again. Hallelujah. Try it one more time. We're going to get there. We're going to find Isaac Newton before it's over with. Here he comes. Hallelujah. All right. We're getting further away. We might as well have a little fun. Try going the other direction. One more time. There he is, Isaac Newton. He said this: the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets can only proceed from the counsel and domain of an intelligent and powerful being. Now, it's not enough for him to say that. I'm going to show you the evidence tonight for why he would say such a thing. But you can see all the different planets. This is just in our solar system. You know, if you put your finger into the sky, behind your finger are literally thousands of galaxies. Galaxies just behind your finger. It's immense what's out there. It's astronomical what is out there. And the reason, we'll get there as we get to the end, but let me hold back on some of this. But he said this is a beautiful system that we are now seeing. William Paley said this. He said every watch requires a watchmaker. Can anybody say amen? Next slide for me. The anthropic principle. We're getting there in just a second. The universe is even more precisely designed than a watch. The universe is specifically tweaked to enable life on Earth. A planet with scores of improbable and interdependent life-supporting conditions that make it a tiny oasis in a vast and hostile universe. The only place that we know of in all the universe where life can exist is where we happen to be right now. These highly precise and interdependent. You know what interdependent means, don't you? If one fails, the domino effect happens. They all start falling. The highly precise and interdependent environmental conditions, which are called anthropic constants, and you'll see that in just a minute, make up what is known as the anthropic principle. It's up here. It means there are highly precise and interdependent environmental conditions called anthropic constants. And what I mean by constants is if these things change, we all die. They change, game over. It's all gone. Anthropic comes from a Greek word that means human or man. So anthropic means human constants that allow life to exist. The anthropic principle is just a fancy title for the mounting evidence that has many scientists believing that the universe was extremely fine-tuned to support human life here on Earth. We Earthlings are much like astronauts who can survive only in the small confines of their spaceship. If the astronaut gets out of the spaceship, he can't go out very long. He's got to get back or he will die. Like a spaceship, our Earth supports life as it hurls through a lifeless space. A slight change or malfunction. Matter of fact, somebody said there is no God. I would dare say if there is no God, we are in major trouble right now. Because if any one of these constants changes, we're dead. And if there is a God, we're in major trouble right now. Because he gets to set the rules. Whether you believe there's a God or believe there's not a God, we got trouble both ways. A slight change or malfunction in any of these numerous factors in either the universe or the Earth itself could fatally alter the narrowly defined environmental conditions we need to survive. Next slide. Anybody have heard of Apollo 13? This is on April 13th, 1970. More than 2 days since mission commander Jim Lovell and 2 other astronauts blasted out of the Earth's atmosphere on Apollo 13. They are now flying through space at more than 2,000 miles an hour, eagerly anticipating a walk that only a few men had taken. That is a walk on the moon. They're headed for the moon at 2,000 miles per hour. Everything is going as planned on their magnificently designed spacecraft. In Lovell's own words, he and his crew were fat, dumb, and happy, but all of that changed in an instant. At 55 hours and 54 minutes into the mission, shortly after completing a television broadcast back to Earth, Lovell is putting wires away when he hears a loud bang on the spaceship. He initially thinks it's just pilot Jack Swigert playing a joke and secretly making noise with valves, but when he turns to look at Jack Swigert's face, he sees an expression that says, I didn't do that. And Lovell quickly realizes that this is no joke. The dialogue between astronaut Lovell, Swigert, and Fred Haise. Now, Lovell, Swigert, and Haise are on the spaceship, the Apollo 13. They begin a dialogue with a guy named Charles Duke. Duke is on the ground in Houston, at Space Station in Houston. Here's how the dialogue begins. You've all heard the famous saying, Houston, we have a problem. Swigert said, Houston, we've had a problem here. Duke on the ground replies, this is Houston. Say again, please. Then Lovell chimes in, Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main B bus undervolt. That's their power going out. And then Duke replies, Roger, main B undervolt. And the guy named Haise, the third guy on the Apollo 13, says, okay, right now, Houston, the voltage is looking good. We had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there. And as I recall, main B was the one that we had problems with before. And Duke on the ground says, Roger that. And then Haise comes in again and says, that jolt must have rocked the sensor on the oxygen quantity tank number 2. He said it was oscillating down to around 20 to 60%, and now it's full scale high. In other words, if you have a tank that tells you it's 20% 1 minute and tells you it's 100% the next minute, you can't trust it. In other words, we don't know what we got in tank 2. We've lost power in main B, and we're losing oxygen in one of our oxygen tanks, and you ain't got but 2. At this point, the astronauts are not entirely sure what is happening. Oxygen tank sensors are erratic, so they cannot be trusted. They're showing the tanks have as little as 20% to the impossible quantity of over 100%. Meanwhile, despite Haise's initial observation that the voltage is looking okay, all the warnings on the space shuttle Apollo 13 are going off. There's problems, there's problems, there's problems. There's a different story happening inside the spaceship. Within a few minutes, the dire nature of the problem becomes apparent. Apollo 13 doesn't just have a sensor problem. It has an actual problem. The spacecraft, now nearly 200,000 nautical miles from Earth and heading in the wrong direction. It's going toward the moon. It's quickly losing oxygen, and without oxygen, you die. It's quickly losing oxygen, and it's losing power. 2 of the 3 fuel cells are now dead, and the third one is depleting rapidly. Haise comes on the radio and says AC2 is showing 0 now. We've got a main bus A undervolt now. It's reading about 2.5 and a half. Main B is reading 0 now. And they're heading the wrong direction. I mean, it's the right direction until everything goes wrong. I'm sure now all they want to do is get back home. Lovell comes on the radio and says, and our O2 quantity number 2 tank is reading 0 now. Did you get that, Houston? 0. Houston replies, O2 quantity number 2 is 0. Then as Lovell looks out the hatch window, he sees what appears to be gas venting from the side of the spacecraft. And he radios back, I'm seeing out the hatch, gases are leaving our ship. And of course, it's got to be oxygen. They're losing oxygen quick. That gas is later confirmed to be oxygen, although that crew doesn't know this yet. Oxygen tank 2 has just exploded. That's what the Big Bang was, and damaged oxygen tank number 1. And that's all the oxygen they got in the process. Next slide. I knew I'd have your attention by now. I had my attention by now too. We come to anthropic constant number 1, oxygen. Brothers and sisters, if God does not keep our oxygen content at 21%, we're dead. Now, we can put you at a higher percent in the hospital in a controlled environment, but if this earth gets out of kilter with oxygen, we die. It's anthropic constant, oxygen level. On Earth, oxygen comprises 21% of the atmosphere. Right around there, it's going to stay. I've been in respiratory for 23 years. It's always taught about 21% is where we're going to stay. Anywhere on Earth you go. You'll have higher pressure some places and lower pressures, but you're just about going to have a content of 21%. If it gets to 25% or above, it would cause spontaneous fires all over the planet, just spontaneously from too much oxygen. If it gets down to 15% or below, we would all suffocate. It's got these fine variables it has to stay inside of. It's called the anthropic constant of oxygen. On Earth, we have this principle. It's a precise figure, a constant that makes life possible on Earth. Without it, we suffocate. Lovell and his crew must now find a way to maintain the right level of oxygen in their ship. The explosion creates a shortage not only of oxygen, but also of electricity and water. For on Apollo 13, water and electricity are produced by combining oxygen with hydrogen in the fuel cells. And without oxygen, there will be no way to manufacture air, water, or power. 3 things you've got to have to live. And since they are in the vacuum of space, there's no source of oxygen from the outside. What can they do? Fortunately, there's a lifeboat. It's called the lunar module. It's known as the LM. It's what they use to go down and land on the moon while one guy circles around up in the big boat. One little module comes down and lands on the moon, then goes back up to the command module, the main one. And they have that little bitty lunar module, and they climb into it. And they have to shut everything down in an effort to save power for re-entry, because if you don't have enough power, you cannot get back into our atmosphere. That's another constant we're going to talk about in just a minute. If they don't have enough power, they cannot get through the envelope into our atmosphere, and they will die in space. In an effort to save power for re-entry, the astronauts quickly power down the command module, the main ship, and climb into the LM, or the lunar module. All 3 of them into this lunar module. But even with the LM, the astronauts are by no means out of the woods. They still have to sling around the moon in order to get back to Earth. That's another constant that we have, gravitational pull. All these things have to stay in order. This will take time they don't have. The lunar module has provisions designed to sustain 2 men for about 40 hours, but they have to sustain 3 men for 4 days. Every effort is made to conserve water, oxygen, and electricity. All non-essential systems are shut down, including heat, and the astronauts decrease their water consumption to 1 small cup per day. Hayes, feeling ill now, soon begins to run fever, and all 3 of the astronauts slowly begin dehydrating. This makes concentration even more difficult, which is very bad now because all of their automated systems are shut down. All calculations now must come from their brain. Are you with me? With automated systems shut down, concentration becomes more and more critical. Slinging around the moon, the crew needs to make several manual course corrections to ensure they hit the proper re-entry angle into Earth's atmosphere and to speed up their trip home. They'll have to manually navigate by the stars, but since debris from the explosion continues to envelop the ship in this vacuum of space, The astronauts cannot distinguish the stars from the sunlight reflecting off the debris, and so they are reduced to using the Earth as one point and the sun as another navigational point. By lining them up in a spacecraft window, they have to make their calculations and make their corrections in real time on the go. They check their calculations again and again to ensure they are correct. They have little room for error. You make an error, you can't get back into the Earth's atmosphere. Are you with me? They're in dire straits. They have little room for error. They must aim the ship for re-entry at a point no less than 5.5 degrees and no more than 7.3 degrees below the Earth's horizon. Any deviation from that range, and their ship will simply bounce off of the Earth's atmosphere, number one, or number two, it will hit at the wrong angle and simply disintegrate. Everything's got to be done right. Precise. Small window. That brings us to the next slide. The anthropic constant number two is the atmospheric transparency of our Earth. If it was less transparent, not enough solar radiation would reach the Earth's surface that we need, just enough. And more transparent, and we would have too much solar radiation. It has to be exactly the way it is. It's designed exactly the way it is. The small window the astronauts must hit reflects the exacting standards by which the universe has been designed. While the atmosphere presents a re-entry problem for these astronauts who are doing manual calculation, it presents qualities that are absolutely essential for life on Earth for us. The degree of transparency determines whether we're going to live or die. Are you with me? Next slide. Anthropic constant number three. Now, I'm going to show you 5, but I want you to understand there's more than 100 anthropic constants in the universe without which we die. More than 100. We better hope there's a God. Number 3, Moon-Earth gravitational interaction. As the astronauts begin to sling around the moon, they encounter another anthropic constant. This one regards the gravitational interaction that the Earth has with the moon. If the interaction were greater than it currently is, tidal effects on the ocean's atmosphere and rotational period would be too severe for life to be on Earth. If it were any less than it is, it would cause climatic instabilities. In either event, life on Earth, science says, would be impossible. It's precise. It's exactly where it has to be. Are you with me? The delicate living conditions inside the spacecraft are becoming contaminated. What is it contaminated by? Every time you take a breath out, you exhale a little thing called carbon dioxide. The lunar module's for 2 men. There's 3 men in there, and they're supposed to survive for 4 days. And they're producing their own death sentence every time they exhale. They have to get rid of the carbon dioxide or they will die. As oxygen is being consumed, the astronauts are producing simply by exhaling their own death sentence. Carbon dioxide is beginning to reach dangerous levels inside the lunar module. Mission Control tells the astronauts to unpack extra filters designed for the command module, the big ship that everything is shut down on. They have to go back into the big ship and get these little filters that filter out and change carbon dioxide so you don't die from breathing it. And so they go back and they get these little filters. The astronauts soon realize that the command module, the main ship filters, are the wrong size and shape for the lunar module. This is kind of funny here. Frustrated flight director Gene Kranz, back on Earth in Houston, says this in the radio: "Failure is not an option," he barks. "If you can't get it on, you all will die." He said this. He said, "Tell me this isn't a government project." In other words, why in the world would you make a filter that fits the big boat but won't fit the little boat? Scrambling for a solution, NASA engineers on the ground began what is known as a workaround. They brainstorm a way to rig the square command module filters to fit the round hole of the lunar module so they can filtrate out the carbon dioxide. And they work on this for a while, and this is going to be good too. You ready? They use cardboard. They have to use things that are on the lunar module. They use cardboard, spacesuit hose, stowage bags. You ready for it? Duct tape. Don't leave home without it. Duct tape helped save the Apollo 13 crew. Go to the next one. Anthropic constant number 4, carbon dioxide levels. Higher CO2 on our planet, we would burn up. Lower CO2, we would suffocate. Think about that. There's a fine line you have to stay inside of carbon dioxide on our planet. Here on Earth, the carbon dioxide is maintained naturally in the Earth's atmosphere. This is another anthropic constant. If the CO2 were higher, runaway greenhouse would affect and we all burn up. If it's lower, we all suffocate because there's no photosynthesis. Thankfully, the rig filters work and buy the crew valuable time, or rather breathable air, so they can survive. As they approach re-entry, the crew climbs back into the command module, the main ship, in an attempt to power it up. See, if they don't power up the big ship, they won't have enough power to get back into our atmosphere. They have to bust through this window per se. This is their only hope of getting home. The lunar module also does not have a heat shield. So if you hit this atmospheric window without a heat shield, you'll instantly just burn up. But with all the fuel cells, all 3 fuel cells now dead, they have no power. All they have available is battery backup. That's it. Because of this, the normal power-up procedure for the command module will not work. So back on Earth, they begin to brainstorm again. How are we going to make this power up? They have to rely on a new power-up procedure that NASA engineers have just finished developing on the ground. To complicate matters, remember they had to turn off their energy? So all the heat went out. No heat. To complicate matters, when there's no heat, you start getting condensation. When changes of temperatures, condensed water is now dripping from the command module's control panels where the temperature is now a frigid 38 degrees. Here's the question. Will the panels short out when they try to power it up? Everything's wet. Will the necessary system come online at all with battery backup? This is a dangerous environment in which to apply power, but they have no choice. Despite the danger, the new power-up sequence succeeds, and the astronauts strap themselves in for re-entry. Back on Earth, the world now fixates on the fate of these 3 men in Apollo 13. News bulletins and press conferences give timely updates. Congress of the United States passes a resolution for all the American people to pray. The Pope urges the world to pray as they watch Apollo 13. In a damaged spacecraft, accelerating toward the Earth's atmosphere at a tremendous speed. In a short time, they will be pulled by the Earth's gravity to a maximum velocity of nearly 25,000 miles per hour. That's almost 7 miles per second. That's fast. You better have a heat shield. You're going that fast. Take me less than 2 seconds to get home if I could travel that fast. Which brings us to anthropic constant number 5. Next slide. Gravity. I want you to get this. I want you to notice how fine-tuned this Earth is. If the gravitational force were altered by, this is what science says, there are 37 zeros in this line of 0. If it's altered by that much, science says our sun would not exist. And if our sun doesn't exist, we don't exist. If you can believe there's no God and believe that, you have a whole lot more faith than I do. gravity that is pulling the astronauts back home is another anthropic constant. This cannot change. If it changes, we die. Its strength is terrifying, but it couldn't be any different for life to exist on Earth. It has to be that percentage right, or our sun will cease to exist. This is what science says. You don't need a Bible to convince anybody. Good science ought to convince anybody. As the astronauts plummet to Earth in their crippled spacecraft, no one is certain if they will survive the violent and intense hot re-entry. Too many questions still remain unanswered. Is the heat shield fully intact? Their own battery backup? Is the ship really on the right entry angle? If it's not, they'll bounce off or they'll crash into it. Will the entry batteries on the command module work? Will the parachutes even deploy? Can you imagine once they get through that envelope, if the parachutes don't deploy, they'll simply hit the ocean at 300 miles per hour and boom, it's over. The astronauts, understanding this, pay their respects to the ground crew in Houston just prior to the 3-minute radio blackout that happens when they come back into re-entry. Swigert on the Apollo 13 says, "Hey, I want to say you guys are doing a real good work down there." Houston replies back, "So are you guys, Jack." Swigert says, I know all of us here want to thank all of you guys down there for the very fine job you did." Lovell chimes in, "That's affirmed, Joe." Houston replies, "I tell you, we all had a good time doing it." Lovell replies, "You have good bedside manners." Sounds like somebody getting ready to leave this world. They're paying their last respects. They know this is probably not going to happen. Houston replies, "That's the nicest thing anybody ever said." Houston says, "Okay, loss of signal in a minute. Welcome home, guys." To which reply Swigert says, "Thank you," and the radio goes silent. During re-entry, a C-135 United States aircraft is circling the area they should come back through the envelope, the recovery area, to provide necessary communications back to mission control. But after 3 minutes, there's no contact with the astronauts. Tensions begin to rise. By now, they should have come through the envelopes. Finally, 4 minutes passes and still no contact. Finally, the aircraft receives a signal from the capsule. Houston says, "We've got a report that ARIA-4 aircraft has acquisition of a signal of the Apollo 13. But still, there's no confirmation that anyone's alive inside the boat, inside the ship." Houston replies, "Odyssey, Houston, standing by, over." To the relief of everyone, finally, Swigert speaks up. He says 2 words, "Okay, Joe." And when he says that, everybody goes crazy. They're back in our atmosphere. This is unbelievable. They made it. The astronauts are alive, but one last hurdle remains. 2 stages of parachutes. First, the drogue parachute, then the main parachute must work, or all that they have done is for naught. Without successful parachute deployment, the astronauts will be obliterated when their capsule impacts the ocean at 300 miles per hour. The main parachute, the drogue works, and you know the story. The main parachute works. Finally, after 4 days of nail-biting suspense, the astronauts, mission control, and the rest of the world can breathe a sigh of relief. It's an amazing story, because there were so many constants that had to be just right. They had to have just the right oxygen, just the right carbon dioxide, just the right turn around the moon, just the right envelope. Everything had to be just right. It had to be just right because God made everything just right. Apollo 13 became known as a successful failure. The astronauts failed to walk on the moon, yes, but they successfully returned home to Earth despite the lethal conditions around them. Just as the crew survived against all odds through these lethal conditions, we too on Earth survive against all odds on this tiny planet called Earth. Human beings can only survive in a very narrow envelope of environmental conditions. If one small thing goes wrong, human life is gone. On Apollo 13, I want you to get this. On Apollo 13, when it got back to the ground, they were able to inspect it. One small thing that caused all this cascade of problems that put the life of the crew in jeopardy. Seems minor, but here's what happened. The oxygen tank, number 2, had been accidentally dropped 2 inches at some point prior to installation. That mere 2-inch drop damaged the tank stand wall and began the cascade of events that ultimately led to its explosion. Due to the interdependent nature of the components, the failure of the oxygen system led to the failure of all the other systems and almost to the loss of the crew. Like a small change in the spaceship, a small change in the universe will result in big problems for us. Any deviation from any one of these environmental factors would preclude us from even existing. The extent of the universe fine-tuning makes the anthropic principle perhaps the most powerful. Next slide. The anthropic principle is a very powerful argument for the existence of God. Somebody said, well, if there's a God, I want to see him. To which I reply, do you believe in gravity? Well, yeah, I believe in gravity. You can see its effects. You ever met gravity? No, I haven't met God face to face, but I see his effects everywhere. There are more than 100 very narrowly defined constants that science says that strongly point to a designer. It's not just a few. There's more than 100 of these things that we have to have right to exist. We've already identified 5 of them, but here's some more. Now, some of this is big science lingo, all right? But this is what science tells us. If the centrifugal force of a planetary movements did not precisely balance the gravitational forces, nothing could be held in orbit around the sun. If the universe had expanded at a rate 1/1,000th more slowly than it did, expansion would have stopped, and the universe would have collapsed on itself before any stars had formed. If it had expanded faster, then no galaxies would have formed. Any of the laws of physics can be described as a function of the velocity of light, defined now as 299,792,458,000,000 meters per second. Even a slight variation in the speed of light would alter all the other constants and preclude the possibility of life on Earth. Who fine-tuned it like this? How in the world does this thing get so fine-tuned? How did it get so precise? If water vapor levels in the atmosphere were greater than they are now, a runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to rise too high for human life. If they were less than they are now, an insufficient greenhouse effect would make the Earth too cold to support human life. If Jupiter were not in its current orbit, the Earth would be bombarded with space material. Jupiter's gravitational field acts as a comet vacuum cleaner, attracting asteroids and comets that might otherwise strike the Earth. Who put Jupiter there as our vacuum cleaner? Amazing. If the thickness of the Earth's crust were greater, too much oxygen would be transferred to the crust to support life. If it were thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would make the life on Earth impossible. If the rotation of the Earth took longer than 24 hours, temperature differences would be too great between night and day. If the rotation period was shorter, atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. 23-degree axis tilt of the Earth is just right. If the tilt were altered slightly, surface temperatures would be too extreme on Earth for life. We have to have lightning to put nitrogen into our ground. Without that, we die. There's so many constants that have to be there. It's not that there's not evidence. It's just that people choose not to look at it. The Bible doesn't say that people are stupid that don't believe in God. The Bible says they're willingly ignorant. To be ignorant means to willingly ignore. The root word of ignorant is to ignore. It's to do this. I don't see nothing. There ain't no proof to me. I don't see anything. Mr. Dawkins, a famous atheist, said this in his book. Here's what it come down to. The premise of his book was, there is no God and I hate him. Think about that. I want you to catch that. I'm going to say it again. The premise of his book was, there is no God and I hate him. Next slide. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross. He's a big-time astrophysicist today. He calculated the probability that these constants would exist for any planet, not just ours, for any planet. Could any planet have all these constants? What's the probability of that happening in the universe by chance? His answer was 1 chance in 10 to the 138th power. What that means is there's 1 chance in 10 to with 138 zeros behind it. Brothers and sisters, if you had a lottery with those kind of chances, nobody would play. Ain't nobody dumb enough to play that game. But yet they'll tell you, oh, this happened. Are y'all with me? Hugh Ross even goes further. He said there's 122 constants that exist today for us to survive. 122 constants that have a certain amount where they have to stay. If they leave that constant, we die. Are you with me? Nobel Laurent Perez is his name, co-discoverer of the radiation afterglow, put it this way. Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing. That's pretty awesome. Think about it. If you believe the universe was created out of nothing, and all scientists now do, what the Big Bang was, come out of nothing. See, they believe it came out of nothing, and so do we. The only difference in our two beliefs is we have somebody that made it happen, and they have nobody that made it happen. Tell me which one's the bigger leap of faith. You're laughing at me? I got somebody that can make it happen. You got nobody to make it happen. And I'm the funny one? He said it all came out of nothing. And here's the second part of what he said. And delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. You don't say. Cosmologist Ed Harrison said this: there is a cosmological proof of the existence of God. It is the fine-tuning of the universe. The fine-tuning. So many variables exactly where they have to be. Here's what you got to understand. When you get into a car or an airplane, there's knobs. You can turn those knobs wherever you want them to go, right? But if you want to find a radio station, you have to turn that knob exactly on the right frequency. You can't just reach over there and hit the knob and hope it lands on one. That's what evolution says. Randomly, it just happened. 122 times, just randomly happened. Yep, just randomly happened. You got a lot of faith. He said there's just so much proof. How do atheists respond to this proof for God? Some atheists admit that there's some kind of designer out there, although they will not call it God. Astronomer Fred Hoyle had his atheism shaken by the anthropic principle that I've been talking about tonight. He said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intelligent has monkeyed with physics, as well as the chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. He recognized the fine-tuning of the universe requires intelligence. Say, well, we can just hit the knob and hit the radio station. All right, well, let's put it in scientific terms. Let's say there's one radio station, and there's 10 to the 138th power empty spots with no radio station. Now, can you just hit the knob and it land? Nobody would believe that. Nobody would say, yeah, that could happen. It could happen. But you've got trillions upon trillions upon trillions of chances of it not happening. And that's just for one constant. We've got 122 they know about. So they come up with this thing called the multiple universe theory. How can anyone seriously suggest this? The multiple universe theory is the theory. Go to my next slide for me. We'll go there in a minute. Multiple universe theory they come up with. All right, this is there's no proof for it, but they say that we're just one universe in what they call infinite universes. Now, to have infinite universes means they're limitless. There's limitless. There's not even a number you can put on it. There's just so many universes out there. Well, how many have you seen? None. But you believe there's limitless universes out there, right? But you ain't seen none of them. Now, I'm going to tell you there's a God out there, and you're going to say, I want to see him. Now, wait a minute. You've got limitless universes you can't see, and you believe they're all there. And I'm telling you, there's one God. You want to see him, but you don't believe he's there. But they do this because it's kind of like, can you imagine? Can you imagine if anybody ever golfed out here? Anybody ever golfed any? All right. You know, some of you know what it is. You know what a mulligan is? Mulligans, man, we're not going to count it against you. You could try again. What they're doing is they're saying, give us unlimited mulligans. It's kind of like saying this, give us a blindfolded monkey. We're going to put him on the tee and just let him swing away. Now give us unlimited opportunities and unlimited, you notice these textbooks, every year they want more and more time. Because they get to looking at it and say, my gosh, I don't even believe that. Give us another 1 trillion years, would you? They're putting a blindfolded monkey on a tee box and telling you he's going to hit a hole in one. Oh, but give us, it doesn't matter how many times it takes. Just let us keep swinging away. It's impossible. Where are these multiple universes? We ain't never seen them. They're there, though. They have to be because we just happen to be lucky enough to be in the right one, given the infinite number of universes. They say there's got to be one that's got our conditions in it, and we just happen to be there. What's funny is they refuse an infinite God, but accept infinite multiple universes, and there's no evidence for it. The evidence shows that it's not a lack of faith. They have faith. They have great faith. The atheist has amazing faith. They actually have more faith than I do. I believe there's one God, and he's invisible, and he's there. I can't march him in here and show him to you, but I believe he's there because of the things that are going on. But they believe in multiple, matter of fact, infinite universes. They have way more faith than I got. This evidence shows, all the evidence in science shows a finite reality, that we came into existence. We had a beginning, and everything is fine-tuned. Now, even if there were other universes out there, that doesn't help them at all, because how did them other universes get started? Multiple universes would not change the need for a designer. It just multiplies the need for a designer. Are y'all with me? The multiple universe theory is simply a desperate attempt to ignore the obvious. I don't see a God anywhere. Extreme evidence calls for extreme theories to try to explain it away. On February 1st, 2003, President George Bush solemnly peered into a TV camera and addressed the American people. He said, "My fellow Americans, this day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 a.m. this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our space shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas as Columbia was lost." And he said there are no survivors. Traveling at 12,500 miles per hour, Columbia disintegrated as it attempted to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. It is hit at the wrong angle, and that was it. Game over. President vowed mankind is led into the darkness beyond our world by the inspiration of discovery and the longing to understand. Our journey into space will go on, he said, yet any human journey into space will only penetrate a tiny fraction of space. There are 100 billion stars in our galaxy. Remember, I told you, you go outside and put your finger up in the air, and behind your finger are thousands of galaxies, not just stars, galaxies. But there's 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone. And the average distance between these stars is, science says, is 30 trillion miles. Well, how far is a trillion miles? Let me put it to you like this. When the space shuttle is out in orbit, it travels at about 17,000 miles per hour. That's almost 5 miles per second. If you could get into a space shuttle and speed through space at nearly 5 miles per hour, it would take you 201,450 years to travel 30 trillion miles. In other words, if you got into a spaceship and tried to go from one star to the other in our galaxy, and you left when Jesus was born, you'd still be in the spaceship trying to get to the other star. That's how far apart they are. And you're going 5 miles per second. Are you with me? We hadn't scratched the surface. That's just between 2 of the 100 billion stars in our galaxy. How many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the universe, the Bible told us. He told Abraham, look down and count the grains of sand. He said, look up and count the stars. Now, when Abraham looked up, he could have counted the stars that day. But the problem was he really couldn't, because there was a whole lot more there than he could see. When we look for God, we should look up, because what we can see is a very, very small portion of what God really is. The heavens are awesome. David said, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Isaiah posed this question. In Isaiah 40:25, to whom then will you liken me, or shall I be equal? Saith the Holy One. Now God said, who are you going to make me like? How are you going to understand God? How can you ever even make him equal to any? He's not equal to the devil, that's for sure. The devil is beneath him. But who are you going to? And then God asks this question, all right? And he answers it, and he says, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number, and calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might. For that he is strong in power, not one faileth. He holds it all together. So God told us, if you want to see something that kind of, sort of leans toward how great I am, look up. Because when you look up, you see a blue, it looks like a roof, but it's not. It just keeps going and going and going and going. That's what God is. He just, and science tells us now, because of the Hubble telescope, they said that our universe is still expanding, and our Bible tells us that he spreads it out like a sheet. And they now know it's still growing. Everything we know about God is still not everything there is of God. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. God has no limits. And from our perspective, neither do the heavens. We cannot see the end of the heavens. And we can't hardly even see the beginning of the heavens. Only the heavens scream infinity to us. If you look down, you don't see infinity, but if you look up, you see it looks like infinity. And that's what God is, infinity. Nearly 2,000 years ago, next slide. Is that all of them? All right. Thank you. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Paul wrote, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. In other words, if a preacher never preaches to you, you know there's a God. How do you know? Because the evangelist up there is always preaching. The evidence of a designer is clear in creation. C.S. Lewis, in his classic book, The Screwtape Letters, said this. The senior demon Screwtape writes some advice to his junior demon Wormwood on how to keep people from becoming Christians. Screwtape writes, keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science. What I mean by this is real science. This stuff they call science today is pseudoscience. It's fake science. It's not real. They want to tell you that you come from monkeys. I want to see a monkey producing something besides a monkey. And until you can show me that, it's not science. It's a belief. So funny because then they'll march out a bunch of bones, right? They're like, we got a skull over here, and we got 25 skulls here, and that skull produced that skull, and that skull produced that skull, and that skull produced that skull, and all you got is dead animals. That skull may never had kids. When you look at fossils, all you know for sure is it died. And how in the world can you look at a fossil and tell me it did something that animals alive today are not doing? They produce something different than their kind. Well, our animals today are not. If you believe that, that's faith. That's why I'm teaching this stuff, because I'm irate in my spirit. Here's why we ought to be upset. If the government, any government, but if the government took your tax money and sent it over to the Presbyterian Church, would you be happy about that? You'd be like, man, don't give the Presbyterian Church my money. I don't go to that church. I want you to understand, evolution is the doctrine of atheism. That's why they say, I don't want religion and science. Neither do I. Don't put the virgin birth in there. Don't put Adam and Eve in there. And don't put evolution in there. That's a belief. Oh, that's science. All right, I want to see a rock come alive. Somebody say, praise the Lord. He said, tell that demon, said, make everything ordinary. Above all, do not attempt to use real science as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about the realities he can't touch and see. There have been sad cases among modern physicists. In other words, evolutionists have changed and become Christians. Even today, when they start looking at all this and say, wait a minute, there ain't no way that randomly happened. There ain't no way there's 122 constants that just happen to happen. I'll tell you what evolution is. It's an adult fairy tale. It's anything but ordinary what we look at. Now science is showing us, like no other time in history, that the universe is incredibly designed with incredible complexity. And there's one place that we know that can have life because of the intricate details that we have on this planet. When the first astronauts passed over the surface of the moon and they saw the earth rise behind the moon, something no human being had ever seen, they reverently read from the book of Genesis, and they said this: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. They said, there's just no way. There's no way. John Glenn echoed their convictions when, at 77 years old, he looked out of the Space Shuttle Discovery and remarked, here's what he said: to look out at this kind of creation and not believe in God is, to me, impossible. To look at the anthropic principle, all of the fine-tuning, and to believe there's no designer, to me, it's impossible. You can believe that, but I would grant you this: you have way more faith than I do. Physicist Paul Davies writes, One may find it easier to believe in an infinite array of universes than in an infinite deity, but such a belief must rest on faith rather than observation. In other words, if you're mad at me because I believe in an infinite God and you believe in infinite universes, then we both just have faith. Do not ever, 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 I want you to get this. Do not ever be caught in the trap. If they say you have faith and we have facts, don't believe it. They're trying to set up something that's not real. Evolution versus Christianity is two religions. It's exactly what it is. The question is, who has to take, now both have faith. The question is, who has to take the bigger step of faith? Because they both have to take steps of faith. Are you with me? Amen. Believing without observation is exactly what atheists accuse religious people of doing. You people believe stuff and there ain't no observation for it. All right, you believe multiple universes. Where's your observation? You believe trees made monkeys, and monkeys made me. Where's your observation? It's the atheists who are pushing religion, a religion of blind faith. Christians have good reason based on observation for believing what they believe. Atheists do not. That is why we don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Anybody can choose to believe that all of these constants randomly happened. But I showed you the odds. That's the same thing as believing a blind monkey's going to get a hole in one day. Just let him keep swinging. You can believe that. You can believe anything. But that'll make it true. But when I look at carbon dioxide and say, oh my goodness, it's got to stay in these parameters, who's keeping it there? When I look at gravitation and say, man, there's 0.3701% of error. Who's keeping it there? My faith has a solid foundation. I close with this. It's not a lack of evidence. I started with this. There's abundant evidence. We are literally crawling in evidence. And next week we'll get into the human cell. That's up there. That's tons of evidence. But when you get into the human cell, each human cell is a factory. Each single human cell is an entire factory by itself. It's amazing what they find in one human cell. We'll get into that next week, but it's not a lack of evidence, folks. The evidence is impressive, overwhelming, undeniable. Some people, despite the evidence, simply don't want there to be a designer. Because if there is a God, we have to answer to him. Let's stand.